All right, looks good. So, welcome to Zoom into Archaeology and our introduction to archaeology talk. Like I said, my name is Nicole. I work with the Florida Public Archaeology Network, and I do outreach and education in archaeology in our community in Northwest Florida. And it's been really hard to do my job during COVID-19 because my job is to go out and talk to people about what I do. And that's very difficult right now. So our answer to doing that is to do these Zoom into Archaeology virtual programs. So I'm so excited that you all could be here to join us today. Can everybody see the screen that I'm sharing right now that says Introduction to Archaeology? You can type in the chat box a yes, or you can just give me a thumbs up reaction. If you can see my screen, looks like I'm getting one yes. So good. Excellent. Perfect. All right. So as we get started, I'll keep letting folks in who might be trying to join us. And also I encourage you to use that chat box function. Ask questions if you have questions during the presentation. I won't answer them during the presentation, but what I will do is once the presentation is over, I'll go ahead and go through the questions as I got them in order. So please use that chat function if you do have questions for me. All right, so let's get started. Introduction to Archaeology. Oh, let me go back here. So what we're gonna do in this presentation is we're gonna answer 4 questions about archaeology. We're gonna answer what archaeology is, how archaeologists do archaeology, where we do archaeology, and why we even bother doing archaeology. All right, so we're gonna answer these 4 questions. And the first question is, what is archaeology? So the easy way to answer that actually is to talk about what archaeology is not first. And so what we're gonna do is go through a couple of things here. A lot of people, when they talk to me about archaeology, they will bring in these really cool rocks that they've found while they're out. And they'll ask me what those rocks are. And unfortunately, I can't answer that for them. Archaeology is not necessarily about rocks. That's its own branch of science. And I'm sure some of you know this. This is where I miss having an actual audience because we get to talk a little bit more. But the science or the study of rocks in the earth is something called geology. So it's not archaeology. A lot of people also ask me about dinosaurs. And I get a lot of disappointed answers when I talk to people about dinosaurs because the study of dinosaurs and these kinds of ancient animals actually isn't archaeology either. Dinosaurs are amazing and they're really cool and they were one of my favorite things growing up. But unfortunately, that's not necessarily archaeology. And we'll talk about why it's not in a second. That's its own branch of science, paleontology. So archaeology is not paleontology. And then finally, people ask me about really valuable things like gold and silver and jewels. Are archaeologists looking for these things? Kind of like the Indiana Jones movies, if you've ever seen any of those. I know they're pretty old movies at this point, but still kind of popular. Archaeology is not about gold, silver, and jewels either. That's something called treasure hunting. People who are looking specifically for those things, usually so they can make some money off of it, right? Well, that's not archaeology either. Archaeology is the study of past people and cultures based on what they've left behind. So again, we're not studying rocks, those are natural things. We're not studying dinosaurs because they were not around at the same time as people, right? And we're not studying just the valuable things that people leave behind. We're studying everything that people leave behind. And everything, that's a big definition. Here's just a couple of examples of things that an archaeologist might study, right? This is a little hard to tell here, but what you're seeing, it's like you're floating over the ground and you're looking down and you can see the big square unit that archaeologists have been digging in. And those black and white sticks in the image, it's hard to tell here, but they're actually, if you spread out your arms really wide, they're about as wide as your arms, right? They're 1 meter long or longer. Actually, those might be 3 meter long sticks. And what you're seeing, those big brown things in the ground, these are actually cannons. 3 cannons that were discovered by archaeologists at the University of West Florida. And why were those cannons in the ground? Well, in this particular case, they were buried by the Spanish, who were afraid that the French were going to come, take their cannons, and use their cannons against them. So instead of leave their weapons behind for someone else to use against them, they decided to bury them in the ground. And then many hundreds of years later, archaeologists found those cannons. So that's an example of something really big that an archaeologist might find to study human history. We also study really teeny tiny small things as well. Now, it's hard to tell here because this looks really big next to those cannons, but this tiny piece is actually about 1 inch long, so about this long. And this is a broken piece of pottery. And so it seems really insignificant. Why do we care about a broken piece of pottery? But pottery can actually tell us a lot about the past. It can tell us where something was made, where people were coming from, the type of designs that they liked to use, the colors that they liked. All of these things matter when you're studying people and their culture. So if you're going to school in the United States to become an archaeologist, like I did, you're actually not going to get your degree in archaeology. You're going to get a degree in something called anthropology. And that's just a bigger term for saying the study of human beings and their ancestors, right? And anthropology is then broken up into 4 different things, of which archaeology is a part. So the other 4 sub-disciplines, as we call them, of anthropology include cultural anthropology, right? And this one, pretty easy to tell with this one what these anthropologists are studying. They're studying human culture, right? All different aspects of human culture. And one of my favorite examples is the way people eat, right? Here in the United States, we typically use things like forks and knives and spoons to eat, right? In other countries around the world, take Japan, for example, they use different styles of eating, right? They use things like chopsticks to eat, right? So it just goes to show you there's a difference in human culture in the way we eat between those 2 places, but all humans have to eat, right? That's something we all share. It's just the way we do it is a little differently. Another branch of anthropology is what we call biological anthropology. And biological anthropology is the study of human biology, right? The human body and the way it moves, the way it works. There's my little skeleton friend there. The third branch of anthropology is linguistic anthropology. And this one's a little bit harder to tell what it is based on the name, but linguistics essentially means languages. So linguistic anthropology is the study of human languages. Languages that people speak today, like English and French, and languages that people no longer speak, right? Like ancient Latin or Greek, ancient Greek, ancient Egyptian. We no longer really use those languages in our day-to-day speaking. And of course, our 4th subdiscipline of anthropology, and yes, and probably the coolest one of all, is archaeology. That's the one I decided to study. And archaeology, again, is the study of past people and cultures based on the materials they've left behind. So now that we know what archaeology is, let's talk about how archaeologists do archaeology. Well, let's start with the basics. What are archaeologists studying to learn about the past? And we talked about this a little bit already. Archaeologists study artifacts, things that people have left behind. And we define an artifact as anything that has been made or used by humans. So if you think about that definition, that's a lot of stuff over the span of history. But it all matters to archaeologists when we're learning about people. So here's just another couple of quick examples of artifacts. This piece of wood on this beach here, this is actually local to Northwest Florida. This is actually a dugout canoe that was made by Native Americans living in the Northwest Florida area. And so what they would do is they would take an entire tree, they would cut it down, and then they would burn and carve out the inside of that tree to create a canoe. And canoes were used to trade and move all up and down, all over Florida and all over really the East Coast of the United States. The routes for trade were really impressive for Native American people living in our area. Another type of artifact here, this is actually a glass bottle, and the color of the glass isn't like the clear glass that we normally think of today. This is actually kind of an olive or green colored glass, and it's very dirty in this picture. But this is what we call an onion bottle, and that's because of its shape. It's kind of shaped like an onion. And this was a glass bottle that was found by archaeologists in Pensacola, and it's from the British period in Northwest Florida. So when the colonial British were in our area, they were there from about 1763 to 1781 in Pensacola, at least. And so we have a lot of artifacts from that period of history, including this onion bottle. And then this is another example here. We talked about that tiny piece of pottery. This is a bunch of very tiny pieces of pottery. This was a plate, an entire plate that somebody broke. People in the past were just as clumsy as we are today. And so we find all the time these remains of plates and things that people have broken. And another interesting thing about the past too, when we're talking about hundreds or thousands of years ago, is these people didn't have trash pickup like we do today. They didn't put all their trash in a bag and bring it out to the street and then have someone come and pick it up. A lot of times what they would do is they would bury it or burn it in their backyards. And that's actually great for archaeologists because we can often associate trash to a certain house, and we can learn more about the people living in that house based on their trash. But not everything lasts over time. So not all artifacts of the past are going to make it 200, 300, or 500 years. So here's some good examples, right? Clothing. If you took a shirt that you have in your drawer and you buried it in the ground for 500 years, do you think that it would last all that time? Well, probably not. No, clothes are lucky to last our lifetimes, right? As we wear them down. We get holes in them, we outgrow them. So clothes don't typically last very long. But if you think about your clothing, there are parts of your clothing that will last over time. So what kinds of things on your clothing might last? Well, plastic buttons, metal buttons, zippers, other kinds of fasteners. Those are what's going to last over time. And archaeologists find a ton of buttons when they're doing archaeology. Food. Something like these beautiful chicken wings, are those going to last over time in the ground over 500 years? No, probably not, right? Those are lucky to last 10 minutes if I'm around because I love chicken wings. But what part of these chicken wings are going to last over time? Well, the bones are. And archaeologists, even though we'd say that archaeologists don't study animals, a lot of times archaeologists kind of have to study animals in that they are related to the people that were around. People eat things like chicken and beef and pork. And archaeologists find a lot of these remains when they're doing archaeology. And plates. We've already talked about broken plates a little bit already. A lot of times archaeologists aren't finding shiny, new plates, whole plates that people can use, right? A lot of times if someone can use something, they're going to take it with them. The things that people leave behind are typically the things they can't use anymore, like those broken plates that we saw. And so I'll give you an archaeology term for the day. When you break a glass, right? The glass breaks into what we call shards, S-H-A-R-D-S. When you break a plate or another ceramic or a bowl, it breaks into sherds, S-H-E-R-D-S. So glass is shards and plates is sherds. And so if you know that term, you're already ahead of the game in archaeology. So archaeologists use artifacts to learn about the past, but information comes from other places as well. And another place where we can get information is from historical records or from symbols that we find on artifacts. So historical records like journals or letters or maps, photographs, paintings, all of those things contain information about the past, right? People in the past wrote those things or painted them or took those photographs. So it gives us a little insight into their life. Symbols can also be found on artifacts. So this particular image right here shows a cannonball, right? It's an iron cannonball about this big. And the artifact tells us some information. There's a cannonball, so that means there was probably a system for firing that cannonball, like a cannon, around. So that gives us information. But if we look really close, we can see that there's a little arrow on this cannonball. And that arrow is actually the symbol of the British colonial navy. And it's called a British broad arrow. And what the British would do about 200 years ago is they would put that arrow on all of their stuff. So it's kind of like writing your initials on your things at home so that your siblings or your friends don't get it confused with their stuff. And you know it's yours if they see them with it. So that's what the British did. If they caught someone with their property and it had that arrow on it, they could take that person and probably put them in prison right away. So not only do we know this is an iron cannonball, we know that this was a British cannonball. And of course, the power of symbols goes on, right? So the British broad arrow is a really good example. I like to bring it to a modern example as well. So I just drew essentially in this presentation 3 black circles here, but you know likely exactly what that means when you see those 3 black circles together. And in this case, this means Disney, right, or Mickey Mouse. So symbols are really powerful sources of information over time. Now, archaeologists get information from artifacts, we get information from historical records and symbols, but archaeologists also get information from looking at the dirt in the ground, right? And we call these features. So when archaeologists dig or excavate a site to find information about the past, they do so very, very carefully because the color of the soil can even tell us information. So here's an image here. And again, this is kind of looking down over the dirt from above, so a bird's eye view down. And you can see the string around the square unit that the archaeologist set up. And you can see that there are these dark stains in the soil, spaced relatively evenly apart. All right. So now as an archaeologist, I find this and I have to figure out what those dark stains mean. In this case, I know because we did some more excavation, what this was a fence. So fences are made out of wood typically, especially older fences. And over time that wood rots and goes away. And when the wood for this fence rotted, it left behind stains in the soil, right? And these stains over time stayed in the ground, even though the wood was completely gone. So now we know as archaeologists, by doing careful excavation, that there was a fence here. And of course, our story then, or our task then, is to figure out the story behind that fence. Was the fence trying to keep someone out? Was that fence trying to keep something in, right? Maybe this was a farm, maybe there were animals. Maybe they were worried about intruders on their property. We don't know, that's our job as archaeologists to figure it out. And here's another really good example of some features or stains or things associated with an archaeological site that we can't pick up and take with us. This is a site down in Miami, Florida, right? And you can see this is a circle with little holes in this rock, right? And it's hard to tell really how big this image is. You can see up in the top, there's some tiny people standing there in that picture, right? Some little teeny tiny people. So that's how big this circle is. And when construction knocked down a giant hotel down on the Miami waterfront, what they found underneath was this big circle of holes carved into the stone or the limestone in Florida. And after doing archaeology, what we discovered was that this was once a council house or a large structure, a circular structure built by Native American people in this area before the arrival of Europeans. So pretty amazing stuff. The Miami waterfront in Miami Beach was a place where people have always wanted to be. So we've talked a little bit about the things that archaeologists use to get information. Now let's talk a little bit about the archaeological process. What are the steps for doing archaeology? Well, the first step is always to come up with a research question. Archaeology is a science, right? So the first thing we do is we ask a question and we create a hypothesis. So a good example of that might be, what did people in British colonial Pensacola eat, right? Now to find the answer to that question, what we've got to do is find an archaeological site from British colonial Pensacola. So that's our first job, to find the place where we can best answer our research question. So of course, that is step 2, locating an archaeological site. And sometimes we can use historic records, like maps or letters, to find our archaeological site. Other times we have to do a little bit more work. And one of the cool things that archaeologists use these days is this cool machine that this girl is pushing. This is called a ground penetrating radar, or GPR. And what this does is it sends a signal into the ground. And so archaeologists use this to narrow down where they think a good place to dig would be. And so the signal from this unit goes into the ground and it bounces back with something that looks like this. And this doesn't look like a lot. These machines don't tell us exactly what is in the ground, but it does tell us if something is there. So what you're seeing, these big curves in this black and white map, are things in the ground, right? So if we're getting a lot of these curves in one place, that might be a good indicator for an archaeologist that there is an archaeological site here. Of course, those curves could also be tree stumps or pipes from nearby homes. So it's not a perfect tool, but it is a lot of help to archaeologists. Now, step 2, once we found our archaeological site, we want to excavate or dig our archaeological site. And we use all kinds of tools to do this. In this image, you see 2 students from the University of West Florida using trowels and dustbins. So trowels are just tiny shovels. A lot of times you use them in your garden at home if you do any gardening. We use those same kinds of tools. So they're digging very carefully by using those small trowels. If we're in a little bit more of a hurry, we can also use shovels to excavate or dig. And in this case, you can see in both of these pictures that the archaeologists are digging in these nice square units to make sure that they're excavating very, very carefully. They don't want to miss any of the potential information. Now, all of the dirt that archaeologists collect from the ground, whether they're using trowels or shovels, has to be put through a screen, right? And so this is a lot like the screens that you have at home, or sometimes, beach toy sets come with little screens that you can sift sands through. Same kind of thing, right? We put all the dirt through the screen. What falls back out is the dirt, and what the screen catches could be those little teeny tiny artifacts that we might have missed when we were digging. So it's very important for us to screen all of the dirt that we dig. Now, step 4 in the archaeological process is to record everything that you find. As archaeologists dig, they're essentially destroying the archaeological site. Now, if you think about it, when you dig a hole in the ground, are you going to be able to put all of the dirt that you found back in exactly how you found it? The answer is probably not. And so archaeologists have to be really careful when they're digging to record everything. And we do that by doing drawings, taking photographs, and taking lots of notes. And so you see here an archaeologist doing a drawing of her square unit, and an archaeologist labeling everything that has come out of the ground. Right, so there's a lot of paperwork and photography and drawing involved in archaeology, probably more than you would think. And so I've got a good video here of some archaeology happening at the University of West Florida. We have some of our archaeologists digging and screening what they've dug up. Right, so that screen, the dirt is falling through, and any archaeological artifacts are going to be left behind and put into a bag. Here's an archaeologist using a shovel, just a little bit different, a little bit slower than using a trowel, but also an important tool for archaeologists. It's a skill to be able to put your dirt from the shovel straight into the screen. And then, of course, an archaeologist taking lots of notes as they dig their archaeological site. Super important to take those notes. So the next step is, once we've been finished working in the field, we then go into our laboratories to identify and examine the artifacts that we found, right? We want to answer our research question. And so we say in archaeology that for all of the time that we spend in the field, we actually spend 3 times more time in our laboratory identifying and examining the artifacts. We have to go through every single thing that we find, label it, and determine if it helps us answer our research question. So there's a lot of work that goes on in the lab. Once we've identified everything, we have to answer that research question, right? And a lot of times what people do, or archaeologists do, is they will write papers, right? They'll publish an article, or they'll write a book about their subject. And here's just a couple of books on Florida archaeology here. But that's not the end. We also have to preserve all of the artifacts and materials that we find for the future, in case other people have research questions, right? So we do things like build museum exhibits, right? We preserve the artifacts so other people can see them. We put things in special boxes so that they don't decay over time. There are a lot of things that we do to preserve artifacts and information. And then, of course, the very last step is to share information with everybody. Archaeology doesn't belong just to archaeologists, right? Everybody has a history. Everybody has a stake in archaeology. It doesn't matter who you are. So we want to make sure that we share that information with everybody, right? Everyone, not everyone may have an interest, but a lot of people do have an interest. And it's our job to give them that information if they want it. And so here's just a couple of examples of how we do that, right? We put up signs in downtown places or anywhere, really, in parks. Here's just an example of a sign in downtown Pensacola. We do things like tours. This is my colleague Mike leading a bike tour out at Fort Pickens. There's a lot of archaeology out in Fort Pickens. So there are a lot of ways we do, a lot of things we can do to share information with everybody. So we know the kinds of information that archaeologists are looking for. We know the archaeological process. Let's kind of get into the nitty-gritty of actually excavating. So when we're doing archaeology, we're actually looking at things backwards, right? We're starting with today and we're going back in time. So here is a cutaway of our archaeological site. So what you're doing is you're essentially we are standing up on this modern ground surface and we're digging straight down beneath us. Now, the deeper we dig, right, the older things get. So those things that are right under our feet are more recent. They were just laid down. But as we go and dig deeper and deeper and deeper, things are getting older. They were laid down a lot more time ago. So in this picture, for example, we see these stone arrow points. Those are a lot older than this car license plate, right? This shell button is older than this glass bottle, right? So we can date these artifacts just based on where they are in the ground. So that's the mechanics of how archaeologists read archaeological sites. So we know what archaeology is. We know how archaeologists do archaeologists. Now let's talk about where archaeologists do archaeologists. And that's an easy question to answer because archaeology happens everywhere, right? Archaeologists work in places like the downtowns of big cities. This is a picture from New York City, right in downtown New York City, in the footprint of one of the World Trade Center buildings, right? And while they were excavating and putting in a new World Trade Center building, they found a shipwreck right in the middle of New York City. Now, why would they find a shipwreck there? Well, this particular shipwreck, dated to the age of the American Revolution. So about 1775. So over 200 years ago, right? Now, why is that shipwreck there? Well, a long time ago, New York City was a lot smaller. People actually put trash and other things like shipwrecks in the water around New York City to make the harbor bigger and bigger. And over time, it created the New York City we know today. So all of these people in white hats and these kind of colored vests are actually standing on a shipwreck from the American Revolutionary period. They probably shouldn't be standing on it, but an amazing find in a place where you would never expect to find it. Archaeologists work in big cities, in urban places, but they also work in rural places or places where there aren't a lot of people anymore. So here is a photograph of some archaeologists doing a survey in a field, in a farmer's field. And this is in Northwest Florida too. And about 300 years ago, the Spanish actually had a mission or a fort in this place. It's like a small village, essentially. And so even though that place is not there anymore, we can do archaeology to learn more about what was happening there that long ago. Archaeologists can work on the beach. This is a picture out at Naval Air Station, Pensacola. Here's some archaeologists excavating the remains of a shipwreck out on the beach. And this shipwreck was probably wrecked during a violent storm. Hurricanes often will toss ships onto the beach. And a lot of times in the past, people would just leave them on the beach because there's really nowhere else to put them. And over time, they would get covered up by sand. And so that's what you're seeing here. Archaeologists work underwater, right? People don't live underwater, obviously, but some of the things that people do or have end up in the water. So shipwrecks are a big one. People were sailing the oceans for thousands of years, but of course, like we just mentioned, there are big storms and hurricanes that can unfortunately sink ships. And that happens all over the place, especially for some reason, Pensacola, we've always had a lot of people coming in and out of our area. And so there are a lot of shipwrecks. So these are actually 2 University of West Florida students studying a shipwreck in Pensacola Bay. And if you can see that they're in scuba gear and they're taking notes underwater on a special kind of paper called mylar. And if you look underneath their clipboard, you can actually see the timbers from the shipwreck. And so this is the kind of archaeology that I studied when I was going through school. So my specialty is in underwater archaeology, but I've done plenty of archaeology on land as well. Usually you're trained in both. But of course, like we mentioned, right, we do archaeology in urban places, rural places, on beaches, underwater. But no matter what, we're always going to have to end up back in the lab to examine our artifacts, to identify them, and come up with that story of the past based on what we found, to answer our research question. Now, we're at the end here. Why do we do archaeology? Why do we want to learn about the past? Well, there's a lot of reasons, right? People want to know about history in general. A lot of people are really interested in this subject because it tells you a little bit about your family or yourself, where your family came from. Why did they end up where they did? So archaeology provides clues to the human past, right? How do we live the way we do? Why do we live the way we do? What have we traded over time? How have people moved across the world? How have we fought battles, fought other people over time? The spread of diseases is something that we also see in archaeology. Why are languages and cultures the way they are? So yes, these are all things that tell us that we can learn from archaeology, that tell us about people in the past. And that's really the goal of archaeology. The artifacts are cool, the things that we find are amazing, but the goal is to learn about the people that came before us and share that with other people so that it can mean something to them as well. Now, archaeology is also important if you like to do things, which I know we're not all out doing a lot of things at the moment, but when we are able to do it again, the archaeology is the reason for a lot of it. So if you like going to museums, you can thank archaeology for that a lot of the time. This is a museum in Fort Walton Beach at the Indian Temple Mound, the Indian Temple Mound Museum. And there's a lot of amazing archaeology from the Native American people who have lived in this area for a very, very long time. This is all from archaeology, all of this information. If you like walking around historic downtowns, there are a lot of these in Northwest Florida. Pensacola, which is in the picture here, is one of them. Why do our historic downtowns look the way they do? Well, it's because of the history that is there. And the archaeology that is done in these places can help us inform us about that history. And of course, if you like going to state parks or national parks, the reason why those places are often set aside as parks is because of the significant archaeology in those places, right? And this is a picture of Gulf Islands National Seashore. There is a ton of amazing archaeology in Gulf Islands National Seashore, including around Fort Pickens, which is where our bike tour was shown in that photograph earlier. So you can thank archaeology for that too. Now, I like to end on this note always. How can you help protect the past? Well, you can tell your friends and family about the importance of archaeology to all of us, how it tells us about the past, how cool it is, why we should be interested in it. And we appreciate that when you talk to your friends and family about archaeology, because it's not something we always learn about in school. I know I never had an archaeology class until I got to college. So it's something that we're all learning more about all the time. So that's the end of my presentation at this point. If you have any questions for me, I would love to hear them. Go ahead and use that chat box and type in a question if you have one. You can send it to me privately or you can send it to the group. And while you're typing, I'll just say that we do offer these programs a lot now. On Thursday, July 30th at 9 a.m., we're doing a Puzzles of Our Past program, which talks a little bit more about how archaeology helps us learn about the past. And it includes a hands-on activity that you'll be able to do using materials you have at home. So if you want to register for that, just visit our website or our Facebook page and you can find more information about how to join us. Otherwise, you can cruise around on our Facebook page or our website for lots of information on local archaeology and history. We're always posting new stuff. We have a YouTube channel as well with lots of cool talks and other videos that we've been putting together recently. So please join us. We would love to hear more from you. And it's not looking like I've got any questions here. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. If you want to turn on your video and ask a question, you can.